Welcome to Flip It Furniture. My name is Amy. Today we're going to be making over this cute little bedside table I got for free from a friend. For the very first time, I'm going to be using DIY paint from Debi's Design Diaries. As I inspect the piece, I notice that the hardware is wired in the drawer, so I'm going to just leave the hardware. I'm using molds on the piece, so I figure first thing I need to do is make about 6 molds. I'm using amazing casting resin. It turns white in about 10 minutes, and that means that it's dry and you can use it right away. That's why I opt for this one. You don't have to wait 24 hours or overnight. It hardens pretty quick and you can get going. So you just mix equal parts. I'm using, I think it was 10 milliliters each of part A and part B, and I mix them in a little cup, and then you stir it for about 30 seconds. It turns this cloudy white and then it goes back clear. Once it's clear, it's pretty much ready to be poured. And at this point, I wasn't really sure which mold I was going to use for my piece. The designs are so beautiful, and these are my new molds, so I was a little indecisive. But I did end up going with this one right here that I check. I think the design will be perfect for the idea that I have. I didn't pour it here, I actually had to mix more, but I just wanted to show you, how easy these molds are. Like, this is right after it's dry. It's bendable at this point. It does get hard after a couple more minutes, but if you use your heat gun, you can just heat it up and it'll be bendable again. Now back to the nightstand. I have to prep these, so I'm sanding the inside of the drawers because they're in a little bit of a rough shape, and whoever had painted them before has a lot of drips, so I wanted to make sure that all my edges were nice and clean. Now for the top of this piece, instead of wasting a million sanding pads, I'm just going to use citrus strip and strip the 2 layers of, I think it's some sort of lacquer, and then paint off. Whatever it is, it's really hard to get up with the sander, so I just didn't want to be bothered. Sometimes citrus strip, just putting it on, leaving it for 45 minutes with some plastic wrap over it, and then taking off 1 layer, applying it again, leaving it for 45 minutes, and taking off another layer. Sometimes that's actually the easiest thing to do because you're basically just waiting the 45 minutes in between. And I am not stripping the entire piece this time. I'm only going to strip the top because I'm only going to stain the top. With the DIY clay paint, you can pretty much paint over anything. And because this does have some sort of lacquer over it, it is a really hard shell top. I'm really not worried about the paint stripping off. The paint peeling off of it. I think the paint is going to stay on there. And this is my second coat of citrus strip going on, and I just follow the same process. I've scraped the citrus strip off, and now I'm using odorless mineral spirits just to clean up any gunk. The mineral spirits is not going to take off any of the paint because that's what citrus strip does. The mineral spirits is just going to clean up any of the mess from the citrus strip. We just want to make sure that all the citrus strip is off of the piece. And now that it's pretty thin, I can go ahead and start sanding. So I sand off the rest of the latex paint that the citrus strip didn't remove. I never want to leave any citrus strip on my piece because if it gets in your sanding pads, you just don't want anything to stop the oscillating on your sander. And sometimes the latex paint, if it's really clunky or the citrus strip is really gunky, you need to remove more of it because you don't want it to break your sander. I've had that happen in the past. As you can see, this piece is really yellow. I'm just gonna shellac right over all of these knots so that they don't bleed through our paint. At some point, I cleaned my entire piece with crud cutter when I was outside, but for some reason I must not have hit record. So I did thoroughly clean the piece and the hardware with Crud Cutter. Then I took the piece back inside and I'm ready to apply my molds. So I just heat my molds up with the heat gun so that there's a curve on the drawers where they're going, so I want them to fit nicely. And I'm using Gorilla Glue in clear. This Gorilla Glue I have used in the past. If you had seen one of my recent videos when I redid my jewelry armoire, I had used Gorilla Glue on the mold and I had such a hard time getting it off. So I know that this stuff is gonna work really great. You could put something heavy on the piece, but I have these little clamps, and for some reason this, out of all the 6 molds I used, this one mold was just having a little bit of a hard time forming. So I did use my clamps on it, but I didn't need it for the rest of them. I'm using this at the top of the drawers like a little border, so I did need to add a little bit more, and it's so easy to cut. You can just use a scissors and it cuts, I'm not even kidding, almost like paper. It's very easy to do. It says seamless border, but since I had to cut it, it's not seamless. So I am gonna use a little bit of my wood filler and just fill in that little crack, and then you can't see it at all. And I did go around my piece and just use some wood fillers where there was like big gouges and holes. The first DIY paint I'm using today is called Kissing Booth. It's a very like pinky, pretty, it's really pretty color. And I'm gonna use this on, I'm really trying to get it in all the details on the mold. And I wanna use it on the hardware too, because with this paint, your best bet is to layer it. It's a really great layering paint. I mean, you don't have to, you can do whatever you want, but if you're looking for layers, it's really easy to use in this way. And sometimes, you know, layers can be really intimidating because they just don't look right when you're putting them on. But by the end of it, if you put enough on, you can see the colors from underneath that pop up, and you just get this really beautiful, like eclectic boho vibe. I chose these colors based on a Pinterest pin that I saw, and it was an eclectic boho room, and I just picked some of the colors that really stood out to me. They're sort of like the gemstone colors. They're really pretty. You just have to be careful. Like I noticed with the pink that if I used too much green, it almost looked like Christmassy, so I had to dial it back a little bit. So you just have to be careful of your placement. Now this color is called Bohemian Blue. It's really, really pretty. It's really dark, so I'm gonna use this on the sides, going up the sides, and maybe like the bottom, because I want the bottom to be darker. At this point, this first layer, this first base coat, I'm just applying paint. My next color here is called Cherry Picked, and it's this gorgeous purple. I just wanna fill in all the white spots now with Cherry Picked. And then I'll go back and I'm gonna do my second layer after it's dry. And when the paint dries, it dries very matte. So this is what it looks like dry. To actually see what it's gonna look like when I put a sealer on it, I just spray some water to check out what the color is going to be. Now for my second layer of paint, I'm gonna go back right here with some of that Bohemian Blue. And I'm just kind of playing around with my colors. I know in my head at this point that I'm gonna use Mermaid Tail, as that's the color that I want this piece to be. I want it to be mostly Bohemian Blue at the bottom and then go up to Mermaid Tail. I want all the other colors to just sort of peek through. Now I'm going to add the green, and that's called Monet's Garden, and I'm adding this to the sides of the purple. I'm going to start on one side, and then off of camera I finish the other side. So whatever I do to one side at this point, I'm just doing to the other. And here I'm going back with my cherry picked color, the purple color, and I'm just blending it back and forth. Now for the mermaid tail. I'm just testing it out here, and I'm going right over the borders just to see on the one side how it's gonna end up looking. And at this point, I was getting a little bit impatient. I didn't wanna wait for the entire piece to dry, which kind of was a mistake. I do have to wait for it to dry to cover it, because if you try to apply the paint over the wet paint, it just blends like way too well and it doesn't give you that look of it being layered or covered. It just blends right in. So I did end up waiting until it dried to complete the look. See, this is what it looks like when you try to add the mermaid tail over the wet paint. It's just blending in way too nice, and it's not giving me that layered look. So now I'm just gonna wait it out, and I did end up grabbing my heat gun because I tend to be a little impatient. But the heat gun works really well, so it dries it up really nice, and you can just keep working. Now here's what it looks like dried, and it's so weird because it does not look like that once you put your sealer on. At this point, I'm not worried about adding too much mermaid tail because I know that that bottom is still gonna peek through. So I'm using my chip brush so that I make sure I have a lot peeking through still. But I don't want it to be all these colors. I just want them to just peek a little bit. And I continue working the mermaid tail down the entire piece. Now here, I waited for the mermaid tail to dry, and then I wet my piece with a little bit of my water mister just to see what the color was gonna look like. And I decided I wanted to add a little bit of the green Monet's Garden underneath the border. And then I blended out a little bit more with my mermaid tail. And that's just because I lost a lot of the green and I still wanted it to be there. And here's a really sped up quick look at what I did with the sides. I'm just applying the bottom layers of paint, waiting for it to dry, and then applying the bohemian blue and mermaid tail right over it. And I'm just giving it that streaky sort of, I don't know, cool look. But we're gonna do something right over all of this, so I'm not being really particular about it. And of course, I go back, take all the drawers out, and I make sure that I paint all my borders. I just pick my main color normally, and I paint the trim on the insides and the trim on my drawers. At this point, I want to add my sealer, one coat of sealer before doing anything else. So I'm adding one coat of Varathane's water-based sealer, and I waited 24 hours for this paint to dry because it does reactivate with water. So you could always use a wax over top, but I don't usually use waxes. I love the satin sealers, so that's what I'm using on my piece. I just made sure that it was thoroughly super dry. And I just wanted to show you a quick look at what it looks like when you add the sealer. The paint just looks so vibrant and beautiful. Here I'm just making sure I don't have any drips of the sealer in my mold. So I just take a dry brush and I just pounce it. For the finishing touches, I'm adding gold foil to the sides of the piece and a little bit on the front. So I'm just putting it in an empty container and I'm crushing it up a little bit. For the technique we're going to use, I would rather them crushed up like this, and I didn't buy them crushed up. I've had these for a couple other projects. So I'm using my chip brush, and I don't want a ton of sealer on my chip brush. I'm still using the water-based polyurethane. And then I'm just making little drip marks, like little circles over, and I'm taking my little pieces with another dry chip brush, and I'm just adding them. It doesn't have to go in any specific spot. I don't want this to be, I don't want to like put the whole square of gold foil over it. I just want it to be little dots, like, you know, almost just little sparkles on the side. And anywhere that it goes on too heavy, I just have a little wire brush. You can get a nylon brush. They're so, they're not really harsh. It's not going to scratch my paint. And I go over it so gently, just so that it breaks up a little bit of it. I didn't want it to be really heavy. I continue that down the side and on the other side. And then for the front, I'm using Dixie Belle's Gold Gilding Wax. And I'm going to add the gold to the border of my mold. And then on the inside, I'm going to add copper gilding wax to the little diamonds. I just gently apply it with my finger to the raised details. And I continue adding the gold gilding wax to the hardware and all the edges of the piece. That means all the corners of the drawers and the entire nightstand. I finally decided which stain I wanted to use on the top, and I'm going to go in with Dixie Belle's No Pain Gel Stain in Walnut. It's going to leave this rich, dark top, and I just think it's going to be warm and beautiful. I add 2 coats of the stain to the top, and I wait about 5 hours in between coats. Now, before applying a sealer, you might want to wait at least 3 days because it's summertime here. I have a lot of humidity, so if I apply it, it might not take so well if I applied it right away. So I wait at least 24 hours, but I did wait about 3 days to apply the sealer on this piece. And I always apply a water-based polyurethane to the No Pain Gel Stain. Here's what it looked like when we started, and here it is today. I added 1 more coat of the water-based polyurethane to give it that really satin shine, and I think it just turned out beautiful. I love the blue on top of the pink and the purple. The pink and the purple and the green are not overpowering on the piece, so it still looks like a blue piece, but that gives it so much interest. And I added some of the gold foiling on the front at the bottom on the legs, just to sort of pull in the whole look, tie it all in together. And if you enjoyed this video and you love color, check out this video here. This is one of my favorite pieces.
Golden thing.